I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest podcast by Defense Report for sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover a dimension of the war in Ukraine that's, well, it's unfolding deep behind enemy lines.
That's right. We're talking about the shadow war of sabotage and deep strikes. And a recent kinetic operation on December 20th, 2025 in the Melitopol industrial zone really brings this into sharp focus.
It really does. Ukraine's main directorate of intelligence, the GUR, targeted a Russian military Ural truck. But it was the timing, the moment of maximum concentration of personnel, that resulted in multiple casualties and showed a whole new level of sophistication.
Which brings us to the core of our debate today.
Exactly. The central question is this. Does Ukraine's increasingly deep and sophisticated sabotage campaign represent a strategic game changer, something that can profoundly degrade Russia's war effort? Or is this shadow war merely a complementary psychological tactic that, at the end of the day, fails to address the real strategic deficit in conventional land power?
I'll be arguing that conventional mass and industrial attrition, the basics, remain the ultimate determinants of the war's trajectory.
And I'll argue that the cumulative effect of these deep strikes is now a critical strategic lever, one that systematically raises the cost and complexity of the Russian occupation. So let me start. My core thesis here is that Ukraine's deep kinetic operations, they represent a systematic application of the death by a thousand cuts doctrine. These operations are designed to achieve strategic goals, degrading structural capacity, shattering command security, precisely because conventional operations are, well, frankly, in a state of grinding stasis. And that precision strike in Melitopol on December 20th, that is not just a tactical victory. It's a validation of strategic intelligence capabilities. Melitopol, it's the irreplaceable logistical gate for the land bridge connecting Russia to Crimea. Hitting a hub like that at the exact moment of maximum personnel concentration, that requires top-tier human intelligence, and just incredible operational planning. This is the state-backed insurgency achieving military effects far beyond simple partisan activity. You have to look at the synergy we saw in late 2025. You have the Melitopol strike, then the astonishing assassination of Lieutenant General Sarovov in Moscow just 2 days later, plus the consistent refinery strikes. It all illustrates a highly coordinated state-directed effort to degrade the Russian war machine from the inside out. This deep resistance, especially in places like Melitopol, it has evolved from, spontaneous defiance in 2022 to a professional state-backed insurgency by now. And that confirms Ukraine's long-term investment in this form of warfare is paying off.
Okay, I come at this from a different way. While the professionalism and, yes, the tactical ingenuity of Ukraine's special forces and GOR operations are undeniably impressive, they remain, in my view, insufficient to fundamentally alter the strategic reality of the war. This conflict is still decided by the physical ability to clear, take, and crucially, to hold territory. And that reality, it continues to favor Russia, given their inherent advantages in manpower and industrial capacity. The harsh strategic assessment is that Russia holds the upper hand because they've already secured their minimally acceptable outcome: control of Crimea, the land bridge, and the occupied Donbass. For Ukraine to achieve its stated objective, evicting Russian forces, conventional military doctrine demands overwhelming force ratios. We're talking 3-to-1 in open terrain, maybe as high as 6-to-1 in dense urban centers.
Ukraine simply lacks the force mass to generate those ratios, no matter how many Ural trucks they manage to destroy in the rear. And we have to acknowledge the material limits of sabotage. Routine attacks on these vast logistical networks, especially the rail system, they often only create temporary disruption. Russia demonstrates immense logistical resilience. They can swiftly repair minor damage, they can reroute traffic. The Kerch Bridge itself, the most symbolic target, has been hit successfully 3 times, yet it remains resilient and functional. ACLE data actually cautions against overstating the impact, noting that sabotage alone cannot seriously hinder either side's war effort. So these deep strikes are vital for morale, yes, and for pressure, but they are complementary, not outcome determining.
See, I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're focusing too heavily on immediate territorial change. You're ignoring the strategic consequences of cumulative damage. Strategic attrition is the point. The effects are not temporary, they are cumulative, and they force immense structural changes on the Russian side.
But are they decisive changes?
I believe so. Consider the persistent targeting of logistical nodes like the Yakimivka rail hub, a crucial intersection connecting occupied Zaporizhia with Crimea. The May 31st derailment of a fuel freight train there, that didn't just cause a one-day delay, it disrupted a critical artery and created systemic risk. When you persistently target these choke points, Yakimivka, key bridges, stretches of the M18 highway, you force Russia into a continuous cycle of seeking alternative, less efficient and longer supply routes. The most tangible evidence of this strategic success is Moscow's necessity to begin building that new rail line hugging the coast from Mariupol to Berdyansk, that's specifically designed to bypass the vulnerable Melitopol choke points. Building entirely new infrastructure at immense cost and exposure, that is not a minor inconvenience. It is a forced strategic adjustment directly caused by the success of Ukraine's shadow war.
That's a compelling argument regarding the forced adjustment, I'll grant you that. But I would counter that necessity with the overall strategic outcome. Despite these highly successful tactical strikes, including deep operations like Operation Spiderweb against aviation assets, or even the Trans-Siberian Rail Sabotage, these actions have not caused a widespread collapse of Russian logistics. They haven't forced the surrender of significant territory. So if we are talking about strategic attrition, we must focus on targets that require major, non-swift repairs. I'm thinking about critical national infrastructure deep inside Russia, something like locks 8 or 9 of the Volga-Don Canal. You know, these locks control the most hydraulically sensitive section of the whole system. If you compromise the internal water balance there, you could disrupt vital river traffic for months, impacting Russia's internal commerce and military shipping. My question to you is, does Ukraine possess the reliable strike capacity to sustain deep campaigns against these highly critical, hardened targets? We see the drone production facility in Tatarstan, for instance. It continues to churn out thousands of Shaheds. Unless these strikes can reliably neutralize those deep industrial nodes, the logistical pressure remains merely painful, not paralyzing.
And you touch upon the right point. Sustained capacity. But the capacity that is being cumulatively destroyed isn't just physical infrastructure, but specialized equipment and, critically, personnel. Let's go back to the specifics of the Melitopol operation, hitting that Ural truck during the moment of maximum concentration. That operation was designed not just to destroy a truck, but to remove military expertise. This contributes directly to the reported Russian daily attrition rate of over 100 units of special equipment. You can repair rail lines quickly, yes, but replacing a team of experienced military logistics coordinators or replacing specialized electronic warfare vehicles, that is far more complicated, time-consuming, and costly in the long run. The cumulative destruction of these specialized assets and the people who operate them creates a functional logistical vacuum in the rear. This sustained pressure degrades the quality of Russian command and control, and it makes every rear area operation inherently riskier. That's the true meaning of strategic attrition, and it's something that's very difficult to capture just by looking at a map.
That detail on personnel attrition is important, I agree. But I want to pivot to the quality of the combatants involved in this sabotage war, which I think tells a different story about the strategic priority each side places on it. ACLED observations reveal a fundamental difference in quality and intent here. Ukraine employs professional saboteurs, GER, special forces, for daring acts against high-value military assets. They're focused on physical attrition. Russia, conversely, relies heavily on, well, frankly, on poorly trained local proxies in non-occupied Ukraine, often motivated by monetary reward. Their operations often result in what analysts have called aggravated cases of vandalism, low-level acts aimed at intimidation. So my question is, does Russia's dependence on these low-level proxies demonstrate a tactical and intelligence failure, or is it merely a rational decision given its overwhelming air dominance?
I think it's both. It's a failure,
and a demonstration of a lack of strategic penetration. The tactical superiority of Ukraine's approach, this nimbler shadow war, is clear because they've diversified their actors from the Atesh militia operating across Russia to the professional GUR deep strikes. But the difference is fundamentally strategic. Ukraine focuses on military capacity attrition. Russia's reliance on these proxies is primarily for intimidation. It demonstrates Moscow's inability, or maybe unwillingness, to successfully infiltrate professional operatives deep into Ukraine under martial law. They just cannot secure the kind of human necessary for the precision strike we saw in Melitopol. This lack of deep, professional Russian sabotage capacity inside Ukraine is itself a profound strategic failure. It forces them to resort to these crude measures that achieve very limited military utility.
Okay, I agree that Russia's use of proxies is crude. But let's reiterate the strategic context you seem to be minimizing: air dominance. Russia does not need sophisticated deep sabotage for consequential effects in Ukraine. When Russian forces face few restraints in bombing practically any part of the Ukrainian hinterland, the need for risky staging of internal sabotage becomes redundant for Moscow. The statistics bear this out. We saw a tripling of conventional strikes on Ukrainian rail infrastructure, over 100 incidents in 2025. Russia can achieve material destruction from the air with relatively low risk, so the reliance on crude proxies is less a failure of infiltration and more a statement that deep asymmetric warfare is simply not their primary tool for imposing material cost.
Well, that assumes an equivalence between bombing infrastructure and precision sabotage, which I would reject. Bombing a railway station is indiscriminate and politically costly. A surgical deep strike eliminates a critical component of command or highly specialized military equipment. And even if air power handles material destruction, the psychological pressure of the deep war can't be dismissed, especially as we discuss the long war of exhaustion. Inflicting symbolic damage has profound effects. The successful assassination of a high-ranking officer like Lieutenant General Sarvarov in Moscow, it undermines Russia's sense of security at home. It forces the entire security apparatus to question its basic safety. For the occupied territories, success in resistance hotspots like Melitopol is a huge boost to morale. It ensures that Russia cannot treat the rear as a safe haven. This pressure degrades the internal cohesion needed to sustain a long war. The very fact that pro-Ukrainian sabotage has spread to Russia itself has, and I'm quoting here, exposed the lack of a complete grip on the vast country, which directly raises the internal political cost for the Kremlin.
And while acknowledging those significant psychological gains and the internal political costs, we have to constantly return to the material constraints that define the conflict's outcome: territory. Russia's fundamental strategy of exhaustion is focused on elongating the conflict to outlast Ukraine's manpower reserves and Western commitment. While deep strikes impose pain and force diversions, they do not resolve the core strategic challenge for Kyiv. Without a substantial, continuous influx of resources for the Ukrainian armed forces, particularly land forces, the battalions required to push back and hold ground, these symbolic victories just don't translate into the conventional capacity required to retake and hold annexed territory. Asymmetric pressure is vital to weaken the opponent, sure, but it cannot substitute for the mass required to seize the objective.
So to summarize my position, Ukraine's deep strike and sabotage campaign is far more than just a psychological tool. It is a high-leverage instrument that successfully exploits Russia's fundamental logistical weaknesses, particularly in contested corridors like Melitopol. This strategy ensures the Russian rear is never a safe haven, forcing strategic adjustments like building entirely new railway lines, and cumulatively raises the political and military costs for Moscow in a way that conventional stasis simply cannot.
And I'll conclude by saying that while Ukraine's asymmetric ingenuity is undeniable and it's vital for morale and for putting pressure on the enemy system, the material requirements for achieving the war's ultimate objective, which is territorial liberation, demand a conventional force mass that precision strikes, however successful, just cannot provide. The shadow war is essential, it's an important force multiplier, but it remains a complementary aspect to a broader conflict still dictated by heavy attrition and the ratio of forces at the front line.
I think that's a fair summary of the two positions. And the crucial interaction between these two dimensions, asymmetric strikes in the rear and the grind of the conventional front, will absolutely continue to define the trajectory of this war.
We'll leave the listener to weigh which strategy ultimately dictates the outcome as events continue to unfold within the material.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.